Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Graveworm, Killing Innocence, out June 2nd on AFM Records. The album has 10 tracks, 49 minutes in length, and this is the band's 9th full-length studio album. They are an Italian melodic black death metal band. From a design point of view, the album was a little bit tricky. The first couple of times that I listened to it, I thought the album was very linear. Nothing really changed. The approach was very similar from song to song, but made the overall sound experience and the overall experience of listening to this record very condensed. Not to say that the album is not like that, but the more that I listened to it, the more I was able to detect the uniquenesses that some songs have that allow you to feel like some of these routines are broken up, and the album therefore gains a little bit more mobility and becomes a little bit more dynamic. Either be changing the intros, the outros, or using some keyboards or acoustic guitars as bridges. These are small changes, very small changes that have a big impact in allowing you to feel like the album is not repetitive, but rather moving slowly at an equal pace, having nuances that change the balance of that pace and create the ripple effects that allow you to foresee the differences within the songs while still connecting with the commonalities that they offer. That is the overall design of this record. As far as the sound is concerned, this is an album that offers a thick, heavy, robust sound experience. But the interesting element within all of that, because the album really feels powerful, it really feels big, and it's very layered and it's very textured. But the element for me that became really important in allowing this overall robust sounding record, dense at times, to still be easier to digest and easy to manage, are the symphonic elements. The symphonic elements on this record fit two purposes. On one hand, they create melody, a melody that dilutes a little bit of that heaviness, that dilutes a little bit of that thickness. The second aspect of it is that the symphonic elements create a dark underbelly throughout the entire record. And more often than not, that same melody that dilutes the sound also infuses darkness to the overall atmosphere of the tracks and the overall atmosphere of the album. So when you look at the sound experience of this record, you really have to see three main pillars that define the entire experience across each and every single song. The heaviness of the sound, how thick the sound is, and the symphonic elements and the ability that they have to dilute some of that sound in key moments, but also infuse that atmosphere that becomes the glue that holds this whole record together. These are the three pillars of the sound of this album. They're very consistent. The nuances that the album has sonically and structurally try to mitigate some of this density, some of this thickness, but this becomes the trademark of the overall sound experience from start all the way to the end. Now, you can also talk about the guitars, but you definitely have to talk about the drums. Outside of the impact of the symphonic elements that I mentioned already, I feel like the next element that really has a clear and defined role, and perhaps is one of the main driving forces of the sound, are the drums. I don't say this every time. How often have you heard me saying that about a record? Normally it's either the vocals that push the album forward, or it's a guitar-centric album, depending heavily on the guitar sound to define itself. Very rarely you hear me talk about an album where the drums feel like the main protagonist. But this album is one of those records. First of all, the drums sound phenomenal. From start to end, I love the essence, I love the drum sound, I love the heaviness, the power, the brutality that they offer, but at the same time, they're not just grounding the record, they're also propelling the record forward, song in and song out. It's a really strong album from that point of view. The drum performance from start to end is outstanding. It really offers a heartbeat to this album, but at the same time, it offers a soul. Now, the guitars are not less important, but the guitars have less of a direct impact on how you perceive this album. Sure, the thickness of the sound and the heaviness of the sound also relies heavily on the guitars in terms of how they pair up with the drums to create that one uniform experience, or how they separate from the drums and become a little bit more driven, sometimes a little bit more penetrating when the song has more of a black metal influence, but also some more melodic at times. So there's a little bit more diversity, even though a lot of the thickness of the sound really comes from the chunkiness of the guitars. But all of that is always overshadowed by how powerful the drums are in the mix and how strongly they push themselves into the forefront, sometimes bleeding over the guitars and not allowing you to exactly see where the guitars are taking you because they're just becoming part or becoming absorbed by the overall drum sound. I like this idea, I like this execution, because you have those symphonic elements that help dilute the sound at times and allows the guitars to come to the surface to catch a little bit of air. Had this album not have those symphonic elements consistently from start to end, this would have been an extremely difficult album to process, to digest, because the soundscape would have sounded too uniform, sung in and sung out. Vocally, the album feels a little bit like the structure. At first glance, when you listen to this record, you feel like the vocal performance is a one-size-fits-all approach, very consistent, very balanced from start to end. Once you start diving deeper into the record, you realize there are a few changes here and there, not many, but a few. And anytime you get the vocals going more into a screaming style vocals, that also helps dilute the overall thickness of sound. When they use both styles together and they layer them up, that's when you start to see a little bit more power coming forward, and then you have the power of the sound being matched by the power of the vocals. The vocal performance is very consistent though, it stays very balanced, and it's one that helps give a sense of linearity to the overall performance of this album. This is a record that at first try, it's a little bit hard to digest, it's a little bit hard to process because of how thick overall it is, how robust, how dense it is. But the more you listen to this album and the more you allow yourself to discover the nuances that it holds, and the more you appreciate of the symphonic element impact to how it stretches out the sound and how it brings that dark atmosphere into the forefront, the more you fall in love with it. It's a strong album. It's just an album that doesn't show you all the cards at first glance. You kind of have to work for it. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with If the World Shut Down. The drum sound on this track is outstanding, using the symphonic elements to create a sinister and dark atmosphere is something that you're going to see throughout the record, but it becomes really visible in this song in terms of how it's used, in terms of how it's put forward. The guitars and drums work together really well, creating that thick wall of sound, and then you have all three elements coming together to create the ebbs and flows, the dynamic movement, the fluidity of the album. Drums, guitars, symphonic elements. These are the three pieces that allow this song to have almost a theatrical, dark vibe to it. Using some layers in the vocals, using the screaming vocals with the harsh vocals together, adds to the overall brutality and the overall heaviness, but it doesn't stay consistent. So when you have that movement sound-wise between all three main pillars, and then you have that movement vocally, it allows the song to be textured, it allows the song to be layered, but at the same time feel very dynamic and very fluid. A really interesting track all around. Next we have In Honor of the Fallen. This is a more methodic, it's a heavy song, but it moves a little bit slower, it moves at a different pace. Vocally it's very balanced from start to end. You allow to see how this track moves, how it morphs, how it evolves, because of how it slowly progresses. The more melodic guitar sound is really important on this track, because at times it feels like it's replacing the keyboards as far as creating that dark atmosphere that this track really needs. It's also a track that thins out some of its heaviness when the guitars become a little bit more melodic. So it has that dual purpose, if you will, within the song design. It allows the track to be a little bit more approachable. It allows the track to be a little bit more interesting, more engaging, moving slower, but with more thin periods of it within it, allowing you to better process it and better understand it. Last but not least, Wrath of Gods. This is another thick, robust, big volume style track. The drums are killer on this track. I mean, they're killer throughout the entire album, but when you listen to Wrath of Gods, I highly doubted that you get to the end of this song and you're not going to be talking about how the drum sound came across. The vocals with the layers, once again, giving, in this case, not a thin out process, but rather a little bit more aggression, a little bit more intensity that matches really well the overall aggression and intensity that the song has. even when the track vocally changes from the deeper vocals to the more screaming vocals, you still see the song carrying that volume and carrying that intensity and that aggression. The symphonic elements behind the screaming vocals give a different ability to this track to stand out for some of the tracks that came before it. It's not a song that has a musical standard or a musical repetition in terms of what you've seen before. The structure of the song feels familiar in the overall context of the album, but how they use the vocals and the symphonic elements together as one really sets this track apart. It allows you to see the different movement that it has. It allows you to see that this is perhaps a little bit more of a theatrical slash cinematic feeling song, still with a lot of aggression, a lot of heaviness, and a lot of intensity, but it's just a massive sounding song all around. This is it, Graveworm with Killing Innocence, out June 2nd on AFM Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.